Hello gorgeous ones and welcome to another video. Welcome to part 2 of every book I read in 2019. So if you haven't seen my first one, I will link it below. I'd recommend going to watch that, although I don't think you need to watch them in order. So essentially in 2019 I read 32 books, which isn't nearly as much as I wanted to. I wanted to do a book a week. Didn't manage it. I'm trying again for this year, but I'm already like a week and a half behind. But yeah, so I thought I'd carry on, but obviously I had to split the video into 2 because I talk a lot about books and I'm prone for a ramble and I didn't want them to be too long, which I think they both will still be anyway. Anyway, let's get into it. So the next book I read, if you are picking up where you left off, if not, the first book I read in 2019 was Queenie by Carty-Williams. I heard about this on the High Low podcast, which is phenomenal, and I heard their author special about Queenie and it was really good, so I couldn't wait to get my hands on this and I absolutely loved it. I kind of bought it for myself as a birthday present and read it at my sister's house while they were all watching, was it the FA Cup? Anyway, completely got off track. This is fantastic. So Queenie is about Queenie, who is a black woman living in London. She's a journalist and it's essentially how she has a breakdown. She's broken up with her boyfriend Tom. She was pregnant and she lost the baby, and the book starts with her at the hospital, I think for a smear test, and they find out that she was pregnant, and it's basically how her boyfriend Tom has kept her on a leash saying, oh, it's just a break, not a breakup, and it's how she deals with that. It's how, just general, it's really good for giving a different perspective. Now obviously I'm a white woman and I understand how difficult it is just existing as a woman, a very privileged woman, and this is really good, I think, for everyone to read, to realise how much worse it is for black women. So she goes a lot into how that black women are completely fetishised, how badly she's treated. There's a moment where her best friend has a new boyfriend called Guy, that's important, and she's talking about him all the time, and Queenie then finds out that it's the same guy she's been seeing who's been treating her like absolute shit. And it's really interesting to see those parallels, and I think it's really important to see those perspectives if you don't have them, because you can't have them. You only can have your own experience, and it's good to see other people's, and I just thought this was phenomenal. So the next book I read on my Kindle, and it was The Woman Who Wanted More by Vicky Zimmerman. Now, I was a big fan of Vicky Zimmerman for a long time without realising it. Again, I've told this story before, I'm sorry for repeating myself, but Vicky Zimmerman has been writing for years under the pen name Stella Newman, and I have read every Stella Newman book. And I only realised once I followed her on Instagram, I was like, why is she doing it under a different name? I was like, oh, one of them's a fake name. And The Woman Who Wanted More is about Kate, who's about to turn 40, and she is in a relationship with Nick. Nick's a twat, and essentially they go on holiday and he breaks up with her just before they were meant to move in. But again, like Queenie, he doesn't actually have the decency to properly break up with her. It's a break. Nick's a twat. I really hate Nick. Anyway, it's basically how she sort of recovers from that. She ends up having to move home with her mum, and she gets a voluntary job at an old people's home for women, and she meets the acid-tongued but brilliant Cecily, and it's how their relationship develops and unfolds. It's how they kind of bring each other back to life. So Kate kind of becomes a surrogate daughter figure for Cecily, and Cecily is sort of she's just an excellent character. I love her. She is such an old bitch, but she's bored, and that's why. So she's been in this home for years. She can't read anymore, she can't entertain herself anymore, and she's just horrible for her own amusement because she's got nothing else. And it's kind of how that relationship impacts them both, but particularly Kate, and how Kate completely turns her life around, and based on the back of that. And essentially the main message is, 1, it's never too late to change, and 2, old people are valuable, which I think a lot of people forget. But yeah, it was such a good read. And what Stella Newman does in all of her books, sorry, I've got pins and needles, in all of her books, is she's obviously a big food lover. I'm a big food lover, and essentially food is like an extra character, and all of the women in her books, and they all have the same formula without being formulaic. Again, I've said this, where it's woman is sort of mid-30s to early 40s, has some kind of life crisis, relationship, career breakdown, whatever, has a mental breakdown, falls in love with food, change his life for the better. It's really, really good, and food is treated as an extra character, and the descriptions of food is amazing, and it's so good. I really, really enjoyed it. Speaking of, I also reread The Dish by Stella Newman. Again, it's on my Kindle. They're all on my Kindle, and I loved it, and I loved that book anyway. So The Dish is about Laura, who at the start of the book has just been left by her husband, and then almost immediately jumps to 4 years later, where she's been working in London for an editor of a newspaper, and she's the restaurant reviewer for this paper, but she's completely anonymous, and she writes a really bad review of a new restaurant, and she meets the head chef, who she then falls in love with, and chaos. It's very good read. Really enjoyed that. So immediately after those, I read Our Stop by Laura Jane Williams. I'm a big Laura Jane Williams fan. It was my second Laura Jane Williams book I read last year. Our Stop is basically, it's a love story between Daniel and Nadia, who get the same train most days, and he places a Lonely Hearts ad, Missed Connections it's called, to talk to her, and it's how they communicate through that medium until they eventually meet and, surprise, fall madly in love. It's really good. It's really, really good. I loved it. I read it very quickly. It's sort of perfect poolside reading, and it's what it is. And what I find with chick lit, again, I don't think that's a derogatory term, it is often used as one, is that it's like a balm for the soul. They make you happy, and obviously things that make women happy are not taken seriously, but it's an excellent book. It's really lovely. It's romantic, and to the point where there's almost an unbelievability about something like that. So like, it's not really, I think, realistic for someone to do that, but it's not outside the realms of possibility, and I think that's what makes it so lovely, because it's accessible in that sense. It's really, really good. I loved it a lot. I would strongly recommend, and I will reread that at some point, Jog On by Bella Mackie. And essentially this is a memoir combined with like a guide to how fitness, particularly running, helped her. Well, she says how running saved her life, and it's essentially, she had struggled with, and still does struggle with, severe mental health issues, particularly anxiety and OCD, and after her life fell apart when she got divorced, when I think she was 28, she started running, and it was how that sort of brought her back to life, and it's really interesting. So it's part memoir, there's research in here about why exercise is so good for you mentally. Personally, I'm a swimmer, so if I'm feeling bad, my head's feeling cloudy, and I feel like I'm being ripped apart at the seams by my brain, and that happens, I go swimming. And I get it, because it does, it takes you out of your brain. Exercise, it completely takes you out of your brain and puts you firmly in your body, and you don't think about anything, just what you're doing, and then at the end of it all the endorphins hit you and you feel better. It is so good for you that when I don't do exercise, and I also do that, it fucks me off, because I know how good it is for me. I'm just being lazy. Anyway, this is really good. There's research in here. It's very non-judgmental and kind, and it's like, do what you can for you and nothing else. So after I read Jog On, this was kind of like July time, I then read Mom Darling by Craig Brown, which is 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret. Essentially, it's a biography, but it has little sort of like fictional vignettes. It's kind of to paint like a more broad portrait of her, but it's a strange format, but it's good, but I wouldn't read this again. So I read Circle of Friends by Maeve Binchy after the Sentimental Garbage episode with Sarah Marie Griffin, when they talked about this at length, and I thought I have to read it. The Circle of Friends is about Benny and Eve, who are best friends growing up in sort of 50s Ireland. They live in a small village outside Dublin called Knockglen. It starts when they're 10 and they meet and they become like proper besties, and then it jumps forward sort of 10 years and they go to uni at University College Dublin, and there it's where they make a new group of friends, and Benny starts seeing the golden boy at the college, Jack, who's a I don't mean to sound like a man hater, by the way, but these men are written horribly. and it's her, she ends up, so Benny's a big girl and is never allowed to forget that she's a big girl, and she starts seeing Jack and everyone's really surprised that she's seeing Jack, and she's like never allowed to forget that he's too good for her, which he isn't because he treats her like shit. And then it's essentially the relationships and the dynamics of this friendship group, and it spans maybe an academic year. It's really, really good. I'm underselling it. It's fantastic. You are, from the moment you start reading it, and it is 700 pages, you are in this book, and it is so good. It's brilliant. I'm gonna not talk about it anymore because I've talked about it for nearly 2 minutes now, so it's brilliant. Very much recommend this. This is what I mean. I said in my last video that I'd consumed a lot of Irish culture last year, and it's true. So I've read a lot of Marian Keyes, I read Maeve Binchy, Sally Rooney, Derry Girls, which isn't a book, but there was loads of stuff, and I've thought about this a lot, and I've got about 1 million examples, but I can't think of any of them right now. Anyway, the next book on that note was Rachel's Holiday by Marian Keyes. So I mentioned Watermelon in the last video. Rachel's Holiday is the second of the Walsh sisters books, and it's about the younger sister Rachel, who's kind of like, there's 5 sisters I believe. There's Claire, who's the oldest, Maggie, who's a lick arse. Maggie doesn't really come into it, Rachel, Anna and Helen, and Anna's a hippie and Helen's the spoiled baby. Basically, Rachel's Holiday, so Rachel's the overlooked middle child and she lives in New York. There's kind of a series of unfortunate events, so she ends up back home after she's lost her job and broken up with her boyfriend and taken an accidental overdose, and that is when we find out that Rachel is a drug addict. Her sister Maggie, the lick arse, comes and gets her and takes her home, and she goes into rehab, and it's about her experiences in rehab and her drug use and why she did that. And it's kind of told, it's always told from Rachel's perspective, but it jumps between present time in rehab and before she was in rehab and how she was spiraling out of control, and it's really good. I did prefer it to Watermelon. I really felt for Rachel. Sorry, I really felt for Rachel. There's a moment in when she's at group therapy when her parents come in to talk about her drug use and her ex-boyfriend and her ex-best friend, and they're all talking about how awful she was, and the lady who's running the session is saying, "You're here to talk about Rachel," and the mum keeps talking about all the other sisters and not Rachel, and you just, that really does break your heart a little bit. It's so sad. You just feel like she's desperately trying to get these people's attention, and they're only ever, sorry my necklace is, they're only ever looking at the negative stuff. So it's like, say one thing you like about Rachel, and it's like, well, Helen's beautiful. It's like, no, you're here to talk about Rachel, talk about Rachel. And it's just, it's really sad. It's really good, and it has a happy ending, and I think at the time it was written, this is very much a 90s book. It's massively groundbreaking. This was my next example that I'd forgotten about how much Irish literature and culture I'd consumed this year, and it is the Aisling series. So oh my god, what a complete Aisling. Once, twice, 3 times an Aisling, and the importance of being Aisling. And I'm not 100% sure if I've got them in the right order, but the Aisling books by Emer, McLysaght and Sarah Breen are so good. So when the series starts, Aisling is in a relationship with a guy I want to call Paul, and they're at a wedding, and he kind of makes it really clear that he's never going to marry her and he doesn't want to marry her. And I think she's nearly 30 and they've been together for a really long time, and it just becomes apparent that he doesn't want to marry her. And so she breaks up with him and ends up moving to Dublin and becomes friends with, I want to say her name is Scythe. It's spelled S-A-D-B-H, and I think it's Scythe. And she lives in Dublin and has kind of this glamorous life with her, and it's how she sort of comes out of her shell. And Aisling is a very specific kind of woman, and you just adore her. She is ridiculous. So she like uses brown mascara, and she loves all the Instagram bullshit, like the motivation, like live, laugh, love. But she's such a sweetheart. She's ridiculous, but she's such a sweetheart, and you love her, and she's so kind. And basically in the first book her dad dies, and then the rest of the series is you recovering and how the family reacts to that, and it's but yeah, you're recovering with her, and it ultimately ends really nicely in the third book with her realizing she is enough by herself and that she's happy and she's started her own business, and it's just really, really lovely. Again, it's really excellent chick lit. It's like truly excellent. Again, this book was a recommendation I got from Sentimental Garbage. That is one of my ultimate favourite episodes, and I would strongly recommend. It's the one with Jennifer Cowney, and it is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. So A Court of Thorns and Roses is basically what they call new adult fiction. So it's basically where it's a bit too old for teenagers because it's got graphic sex in it. But it's a fantasy novel, and essentially it's set in a world where the humans and the fairies have an agreement that if a human kills any fairies, they belong to that fairy, or they belong to the fairies now. And so it's about Feyre, who is a hunter. It's very much in the kind of like a Hunger Games kind of vibe, but set either thousands of years ago or thousands of years in the future. And essentially she kills a fairy disguised as a wolf while she's hunting to provide for her poor family, not realising it's a fairy. And then I can't remember his name. What's his name? Tamlin, the king of the fairies, basically comes and kidnaps her, and it's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast but with fairies, and she has to go live in his castle and fall in love with him to break a curse that's been placed on him by Aramantha, who was the evil fairy queen who'd kind of taken over the kingdoms. It sounds ridiculous, guys, it is ridiculous, but it's really good. And essentially it's just their love story, but there's some fairly vivid sex scenes in it. So after reading ACOTAR, as it's known on the internet, I read A Half-Baked Idea by Olivia Potts, which is essentially a memoir about Olivia, who was a quite a successful barrister, and her mum dies very suddenly. And after her mum dies, as she's processing her grief, she decides to leave her career that she's worked very hard for and go to Le Cordon Bleu to train as a pastry chef. And it's about love, and it's about grief, and it's about cake, which are my 3 favourite talking points. And it's really beautifully written. I mean, within the first 5 pages I was crying. So there's this one moment where she's just found out that her mum had died, and she said, "I was afraid, I was so terrified, it was visceral, physical. I felt like I needed to wee and be sick and be held tight simultaneously. I felt like I would shatter if I were touched. I was scared of not having a mother. I was scared of losing that person who was contractually, biologically, genetically obligated to love me. I was scared of not having anywhere to put my love for her." And I took a picture of that and I sent it to my mum. That is a really lovely book. I would reread this. It has made me cry. Okay, so my camera light is flashing, which means I am running out of battery, so I'm going to get through the next ones a bit quickly. After that, I read The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. Read it on my Kindle, absolutely loved it. I love Ruth Ware. Her books are very tense and atmospheric and stressful in that you never quite know what's going on. As well as The Turn of the Key, I read The Death of Mrs. Westway, also by Ruth Ware, and again, really liked that. So The Turn of the Key is about Rowan, who got a job as a nanny for a family that live in a remote sort of area of Scotland, and is accused of murdering one of the children. And The Turn of the Key is about Hal, or Harriet, who gets a letter saying that her grandmother has died and she's been left a lot of money, but it's not her grandma. So she can't decide whether to defraud this family or not. So she goes to visit them anyway, and then shit goes down. Both of them are really, really good. Out of the 2, I prefer The Turn of the Key. Would read both of them again. And then after that, I read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I read this on my Kindle, and I read it just before Christmas, and I absolutely adored it. It is wonderful. It is everything that is good about writing, and I sincerely mean that. So Evelyn Hugo is a very famous actress, and she has just put all of her clothes up for auction. So Monique Grant, a journalist, is invited to interview Evelyn, and basically she tells her life story, and it's so wonderful. It's wonderfully written, it's very evocative, you are completely in that story. It's so beautifully done. Read it in a couple of days, would absolutely reread again. And on that note, I have literally bought everything Taylor Jenkins Reid has written and put it all on my Kindle because I love the way she writes. She's fantastic. And then the last book was actually a Christmas present, and it was The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie. I think this is McLysaght. And what this is absolutely gorgeous. It is the most beautiful illustrations, and it's kind of like, it's so lovely. It's kind of like Instagram wisdom, but if it wasn't bullshit. So, nothing beats kindness, said the horse. It sits quietly beyond all things. So it's very, very profound. It's absolutely beautiful. And this was actually a Christmas present from my sister-in-law and my brother, but I have also bought another copy, which I will be sort of tearing apart and framing pages from, but it's so gorgeous. So the basic story is it's a little boy that's got lost and is finding his way home, and he befriends a mole, a fox and a horse, and it's how they're all very profound. The mole is obsessed with cake. I relate to the mole the most, and it's just so beautiful. Like, I just pick it up. It's not really a book you read, it's kind of a coffee table book in that you just pick it up and marvel at its beauty. But it's just, honestly, it's so gorgeous. So like, we don't know about tomorrow, said the horse. All we need to know is that we love each other. And it's just stunning. I love it so much. I've also bought a copy and given it to my best friend Michael, just because it's so wonderful. And it's one of those books you want to share with everyone. You want everyone to see how wonderful it is. So that was all of the books. 32 books, 33 I think actually, that I read in 2019. That was a lot of books. Thank you very much for watching this video. Let me know if you have any book recommendations for me in the comments below. We'll also link part 1 of this video there as well. If you want to see more of those videos, let me know either by commenting or liking, and please hit the post notifications bell. I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.